Yes, I have some stories about conferences that I don't want to put on tape.
Okay, now here's going to be something that I don't want you to put on the tape.
I've got a great story I can tell you off camera.
I always called him Steve. Barry always tried to get me to call him something else like Poopsie or Sevy or something like that, but I always called him Steve.
Many of you may or may not know his nickname is Sevy, named after a world-famous golfer. And one of my favorite stories is a group of us were traveling, I think, to Hilton Head, and a lady a passenger overheard us calling him Sevy, and she came running back and said, "Oh, we just love you, we just love you." And where most people would say, "I'm sorry, you're mistaken," he began signing autographs.
I went to work for Patterson's in 1972 as an art director. And my memory's kind of vague about this, but I think he was a senior in high school or possibly coming out of high school when we met.
Steve liked to party, even-keeled.
He had his wild side, but he never got crazy, you know? I mean, you've known wild people, and he just had fun, and still does to this day. That's what I love about him.
My opinion of Steve is that he is completely independent, and I'll give you a story about that. Steve decided to go on a world tour, and he literally has gone around the world. And one of the stories I know about is he went to, I think it's Pamplona, Spain, where the bull run is, and he ran with the bulls. You've got to be a little nuts to want to do that in your life as one of your life goals.
Steve and I became friends at KU, but then when we graduated, I didn't know he lived in Topeka, and I, at that time, lived in Kansas City. And then we moved to Topeka in 1977, and I went to go around to the advertising agencies because I'd been an art director in Kansas City. And I pulled into Patterson Advertising, and I got out of the car, and there was Steve Patterson getting out of the car. And I said, "What are you doing here?" And he said, "Well, this is my dad's ad agency, and I own a printing company, and I live here." And so, I had no idea, so we reconnected at that time.
Sevy cared tremendously about quality. He would say in a heartbeat, "Why are you doing that? That won't look good. That paper stock's too light." He didn't have any trouble volunteering information, not to belittle you, but to make that job be better.
Steve wasn't an artist, but he was very creative in terms of being able to help you out with different kind of print processes, whatever kind of a stock might be best for the piece you wanted to do, or color combinations, or duotones, or four color, or, he could give you lots of good advice on creative printing.
I started 4 decades ago, and honestly didn't know much about anything, but the thing I knew the very least about was printing. So I walk in with a project, and at least I was smart enough to know I didn't know anything, begging for help, and Steve provided me that help.
Steve always wanted to have a bigger press than he had. Didn't matter. He started with a little 2-color press, and when he went to 4-color, it was like we had a party. I mean, it was a big deal, and it was a big deal. It was very expensive, and he always wanted to do the best. That means he had to have the best equipment, and he strived really hard to do that.
Steve was long a strong part of the Ag Club board, and helped this club at a point in time where we needed help. Was always a go-to solution when we needed printing because we didn't have any money. Steve found a way to make that happen, brought good ideas to the table, and long supported the club and brought up what behind the years kids like me when we really needed that kind of mentoring.
He was always interested in helping organizations, so he did a lot of work for charities and stuff that through the agency and through the print shop, and I like that about the guy.
Steve is a person who never really asked for any accolades or wanted to get credit for anything like that, but he has been in the Topeka ad community for such a long time and just really doing anything that anybody asked him to do. He's just been a huge supporter.
I'm a longtime ag club advocate. You know, the reason I have friends in this market, and I think the reason that this market's more positive than most ad markets, we don't all try to kill each other every day.
I really like working with Steve because he's got a good sense of humor, and we're always nailing one another with something. That's probably a property from his dad.
I mean, the main thing about Steve was that he was always just really lighthearted. You know, just a lot of fun. That nothing ever seemed to really bother Steve.
You know, Steve is the kind of guy that always has an up attitude, at least externally. I don't know, maybe he's in the throes of depression 90% of the time. But for me, when I think of Steve Patterson, when I put that picture visually in my mind, it's a guy who's happy, who sees positives, even in challenging times.
I think of Steve as a very confident person, a really interesting person. You know, he has a very different perspective usually on life than you get from other people. And I always loved talking to him because he just, you know, he had sort of that little twisted, goofy view of life.
I couldn't be prouder that he's been selected. I think it's great. I'm sorry he's retired, but way to go, Steve. Yeah.
When we talked about this year's silver medal candidate, there wasn't any question to me. Steve is not only an appropriate but a significant part of this community who should be a silver medalist. So, Steve, congratulations, my friend. Well deserved.